Hi there, welcome to another video from the Vickers MG Collectional Research Association. In this video I want to pick up on a few points that have been raised following the Armourers Bench video about the work that we did with them back in April 2021. And we worked together to produce some documentary footage for Real Time History and their Crossing the Rhine documentary. And that looked at how we put a platoon of Vickers machine guns in the field and how they would have been used as part of a pepper pot operation. Now, what we did was obviously provided the firing weapons for that and some of the expertise on machine gunnery. And Matt's recently released the video that shows a bit more about pepper pots and how the machine guns were used. Robbie Maguire of RM Military History put together a video back in the summer of a bit of behind the scenes, and both of those showed some of the problems that we were having running the guns that day. It was an extremely wet day. That doesn't necessarily provide an excuse, but provides some of the context for what we were doing. And we are running firing weapons, not this one. This is a skeletonized version, which I've got to be able to show you, what some of the problems were with that. But we were using weapons that are 70 years old. We were using brand new blank ammunition now, and that ammunition had been filled into ammunition belts and ammunition liners a couple of years before, actually, as part of a previous shoot that we'd done that had some ammunition left over. The ammunition belt itself is quite an important part of the gun, and we'll explain more, but we were using these fabric stripless disposable ammunition belts that are really designed for one-time use. We do tend to use these when we can and when we're doing Second World War material, because they're more accurate and a more sort of loyal depiction of the problems, of the machine guns and how they were used in the day. Machine guns and stoppages are not an unknown thing. Clearly, there are many accounts of the Vickers running for hours and hours without stoppages, and those stoppages can be one of two things: temporary or permanent, or more prolonged, I think is the word that's used in the manuals. Temporary and prolonged. Temporary stoppages are generally down to ammunition, and particularly with blank ammunition, which I'll explain more of in a moment, we have some additional problems, and particularly with modern blank ammunition that we have some particular problems. We didn't have any prolonged stoppages on the day. Everything we were able to do was resolved quite quickly, but because of the nuance of blank ammunition, that meant that we had to make some adjustments as we were going along. What we would have liked to have done in that day is to use the flash eliminator on the guns, because that's what's seen, it goes around the muzzle attachment, the bulbous accessory that goes on there, but we didn't do that. Now, one of the reasons that we didn't do that, and just to explain, is we have two different types of blank firing attachment that we use in the collection. When we're firing here in the shed, we use this. This is the service pattern blank firing attachment. It is fully adjustable, so that if you have different types of blank, you can basically change the amount of pressure that is built up for a recoil operated weapon. And we have this is a film type one, because it doesn't look like a blank firing adapter. It's actually it's been necked down within here and a grub screw put in so that less gas is released out of the front. This requires a much sort of larger safety area in front of the weapon, whereas this one can be restricted to closer use, hence why we use that indoors, because nothing will come out of the front of it. Now, it's really important to understand that the blank firing adapters go on the front of the gun, because where the, I can use the diagram on one of our posters, where the Vickers differs from many weapons, it's a recoil operated weapon. So all of the gas rebounds against the cone here and pushes the barrel backwards, and that's what operates the weapon. That's one of the fundamental problems that we have with modern blank, is they're designed for gas operated weapons such as the Bren light machine gun, where you require some of the gas to be projected back down through a tube that pushes on a piston that then operates the action. In a way, the barrel works as the piston in the Vickers machine gun, so that it's almost like a blowback weapon, like a submachine gun, in that it pushes the mechanism back. But yeah, recoil operated, and then the spring pushes that forward again. And we'll talk more about that on the gun. But because the blanks that we have now are very, very much designed for this gas operated weapons, we have a longer burn. So one of the reasons that we don't use the flash eliminator is because it enables more gases to build up in this area that are unspent. And one of the other problems that we have, excuse me, is that when we use these blank firing attachments, the muzzle cone that's so the muzzle cup that fits inside is adapted to reduce the amount of gas that's released. And on the film one, we actually have that, you know, fully encased so that we capture as much of the gas as possible. All that means that we have to be very careful about how much gas, how long firing we do, and everything like that. One of the things that we were particularly troubled on the day was the rain. The rain causes, once these belts start to swell up and expand, causes tight pockets in the belt, and that stops ammunition feeding in the same way. It causes too much friction in the system. So normally you'd resolve that with just the oil, you know, more oil, more oil, more oil. But that comes to a point where you can't do that. And it also, one of the things that we were expecting was actually we weren't expecting to fire as much ammunition as we did. We fired nearly 900 rounds that day, which started to heat up the guns more than we were expecting on the initial planning. And therefore we hadn't put water in the barrel casings, so that we were starting to get additional friction caused by the increased size of the heated up parts. So, you know, there were some problems, but what we were able to do on the Vickers and using the skeletonized version, the sectioned version that we have here, I'll explain more about how some of those particular stoppages were a problem and how we resolved them. Now, we did have one of every type of stoppage almost, so there were 4 principal stoppages on the Vickers, all of which can be determined by the position of the crank handle. If I just open the bottom cover there, we have the first position, the second position, the third position, and then the 4th position. And you know, depending on where the crank handle stops means we can you know, determine which is the different, you know, which stoppage and which immediate action to be used in most cases. Most immediate action is basically you know, recock the weapon and make sure that it fires again. And then depending on whether there is a secondary stoppage or immediate stoppage, it almost gives an impression then of what's happening. It's important to note that those that we use in the weapons on the day were, despite some initial training, you know, it was only sort of brief training from myself, they were not experienced in using the Vickers too much. You know, we are putting together training packages for those servants, those that are authorised to use our weapons in the association, and we may well share more of that on this online as well. So if you fire a Vickers, if you're privileged enough to be able to do so, then please do get in touch with us and we can perhaps talk to you about some of those training packages as well. But what certainly the educational content that sits behind them, what we were able to do and understand by looking back at the video that, let's say, Matt Moss and Robbie Maguire have produced, is the stoppages that we were having. So we did have a few first position stoppages when the handle basically, do that again, when the crank handle stops in that position. You can see here that the extractor has stopped. It has not had enough pressure to be able to put the push the recoiling portions all the way to the rear. Now that may mean that the fusee spring on the left hand side of the gun here was set up to with too high a tension, so it was pushing against the recoil. It may be that there was a weak charge, which is something that can be seen in some of the clips where we get a different sort of smoke plume or something at the front of the gun. It can also be that there was too much friction on the belt pocket. So if, you know, this belt is a drill purpose belt that we've made actually, but you can see we use it quite regularly for our demonstration shoots, and the rounds come out quite easily. We just cock the weapon, you know, and then we get a third position stoppage, which we'll talk about in a moment actually. So, you know, they come out quite nicely and quite easily. With the damp that we were getting in the stripless belts, partly because they had been filled for so long and not in sealed liners, which is the intention when those were first produced, was that they would be sealed at the factory and they wouldn't be exposed to any conditions until they reached the gun position and the number 2 or the number 3 would have opened those. These had obviously been loaded for some time, so that was some of the major causes of our stoppages, and the fact that during the start of the day it was actually too wet to film to start with for what needed to happen, because the camera equipment had to be kept dry, and therefore the top portion of these belts actually got quite damp, and you know, they were left out for some time, despite trying to keep them as dry as possible. You know, they got damp, and that increased the tension and the friction in the pockets there. So let's say there's just not enough tension, too much not enough force to come backwards, too much friction in the system. So in this case of this, we add more oil, we release the tension on the fusee spring, and what we may do with the service pattern adapter is just decrease the amount of space that's in there so that we're capturing more gas, so there's more pressure that's being able to push back. So overcoming that weak charge. But you do, with the blank firing adapter, we'd be doing that in a certain order. And then we were changing ammunition belts as well and reloading different and drier belts to make sure that we got some bursts through. Immediate action in this case is normally just to pull the crank handle back and let it go forward again, and then fire the weapon, and it would carry on as normal. So that was the first position stoppages. Now, second position stoppages are when so it goes all the way back, it goes forward, and it stops normally about there, pretty upright position, and that's caused by normally a damaged case actually. So there's a couple of examples that happened on that day. Damaged case, damaged cartridges that won't feed properly. So if this is the case, we then end up with stuck like this, and what we need to do is just pull that back, let the extractor drop as much as possible. Sometimes we might need to come up, open up and clear the face of it, but we just need to make sure that that is the case. And then next time round it should, depending on where that action's happened, so we'd have to pull the bout across and let it chamber a round. Do that half load mechanism again. So yeah, we had a few of these. We end up then just trimming them off in a fast saw, but that's for others to concern, or putting them in the burn bag. Then third position stoppages. Third position is really interesting, and we get a lot of them actually. So what you get with a third position stoppage, let's see if I can just simulate. You get it like that. So third position stoppages normally means there's a misfeed on the bout. And we had quite a lot of those, again, because this bout was swelling up. It was not only causing tight friction, but this gap here was getting stuck going in, and also it gets quite heavy. And you'll notice from some of the footage that on much of the firing, we had only one person in each pit. We were working under COVID restrictions, and only at the time only a couple of the guys, because of their jobs, had their vaccinations. So we had to make sure that we kept nice lot of distance between people, and that meant that most pits, for a lot of the firing when we were trying to get long shots, we only had one person in each pit. We minimised numbers on the day basically. When we could get some closer in shots and we were working together, it meant that the bout could be supported and being fed in like that. And hopefully you've seen our belt box carrier video. We didn't use belt box carriers because they weren't used in that period, so we relied on number twos to feed that ammunition belt in. So we had quite a few of those because the belts were bouncing about unsupported. What we just need to do in that case is just move that belt forward, move that in manually, and then it would fire again and start to work quite quickly. That is quite an interesting problem though, because on some of them, if the belt is twisted, let's see if we can just twist the belt, it can get quite jammed. And under any force that could be really difficult to clear. Sometimes you're able to hit it down, sometimes you have to get it back up, but you have to pull the belt to the left, and sometimes you have to open up the top cover and push down on the extractor to release it off if it's already partially taken it. So yeah, it can be quite a difficult one to clear, but it's certainly the most common. And then you can start, if you're doing lots of them, you start to get a problem with your hand here. You bruise quite easily there. To which we've seen in one of our videos actually. If you look at one of our film analyses, you can see a guy with a bandage wrapped around his hand. We've seen that. I had a few photos and films now where obviously he's number one and he's doing that quite a lot. So that was quite an interesting stoppage to have. Now, fourth position stoppages is when the crank handle is in this position. And we've almost got the opposite to a first position stoppage. What we've got there is too weak a charge to actually operate the recoiling portions at all. So if we have this fully open, or we didn't have a blank firing adapter at all the energy would be going out of the gun and we would lose it. And there would be no energy pushing back. So we had a few of those. We had quite a few of those actually, as we were setting up the guns, or as the weather conditions changed. We found that the atmospheric pressure was affecting the amount of the amount of gas that we were collecting. If we had the fusee spring done up way too hard, again, it's not going to there's too much friction on there. But what we also saw was, because of the inexperience of the firers, single shots being fired, because what was happening is when they were having an immediate action, they would be doing this action, particularly after another stoppage, firing it, and because they hadn't pulled the belt to the left every time, they hadn't done the full load or the half load, depending on the immediate action. There was the two rounds were not in line with the chamber. So in this case, we've got a round in line with the chamber in line with the feed block, and a round in line with the chamber. So the gun is going to operate automatically. But because of that inexperience and sort of the pressure of the day, actually, in some cases, that was part of the problem. One of the other stoppages that we had was actually a broken component, what would be classed as a special C, I think it is. It's a broken component in the feed block. Let's just clear that. And what we had was, I think it was caused by, again, the belt swelling up. But what we started to do was this top lever started to separate. So if we can just... I can do that manually. We had this top lever here started to separate and create too much pressure, so that when the recoiling portions were going back, they weren't going back all the way. And then at one point, it actually separated completely. It didn't break, but it separated completely, and there was no longer any. And that's when we noticed it, what the problem was actually. But it was this indent here was no longer acting on the feed block, so on the slide. So I can't do that. Bear with me a moment. We have a T-fixing pin. So it had come off so far that the slide wasn't working, the slide, so it wasn't loading another round. But of course, when somebody is then getting an inexperienced person is starting to get it, see if I can simulate it. That's the pin up there. No, it's gone straight back in, sadly. But once you start to sort of get that, and you could try and clear what you think are number 3 stoppages, or you're getting a single shot. So yeah, special C, considered broken components in the feed block, and isn't working properly. So what we had to do was we had some DIAC guns there providing the some additional photo footage. So we swapped one of the feed blocks out of one of those deactivated guns, and then it ran really well. And you can see, as we got at the end of the day, the weather started to shine, and we started to get some great 25 round bursts, because that's what we were going for. So I hope that's been interesting, and you learned a bit more about some of the nuances of the Vickers and the stoppages and stuff. Like I say, we're going to run some proper training for our servants, and we're going to open that up as an educational package for those that have access to the Vickers as well. So bona fide people that want to learn how to use the Vickers machine gun. There'll be different ways of doing that, so reach out to us if that interests you. Please do support us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/VickersMG, as they help fund some of these activities. Although this was a piece of a documentary, we're going to do more work with partners like the Armourers Bench, RM Military History, and some more firing. And that's clearly not a cheap activity. But it really helps us learn actually what's happening with the Vickers, and stuff like this stoppage video I hope has been interesting. You can see some of this stuff happen in wartime footage. This is not something just because we don't use the guns that often, or we're not trained soldiers or whatever. Stoppages and immediate actions happen all the time, so they're really important to understand how the Vickers is working, and what makes it tick really. And if you'd like, we've had this poster printed on foam board. If you'd like one of these posters, we have them available in our shop on up to A0 actually. This is A1, but we can produce those. And then we have our full range of posters here that you can see, all available to purchase through the shop, alongside the likes of the Pride of the MG's book and other materials that we have. Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Please support us on Patreon if you're able to, and let us know of anything you'd like to see in the future. I look forward to hearing from you.